The Fujifilm 18mm f2 is one of the very first lenses that Fujifilm came out with for the X-mount system, and it's also widely regarded as one of their worst performing lenses. And to be honest, it kind of is. However, this has become one of my absolute favorite lenses for the Fujifilm system. Let me tell you why. To get started, let's go over the reasons that this lens is not considered very good. First is the sharpness. Now this lens by no means is soft. It definitely has decent contrast and decent sharpness, even wide open at f2, but it does fall behind more modern lenses. You can tell it doesn't have that tack sharpness that a lot of more modern mirrorless camera lenses have. To me, it falls more in the realm of a decent old DSLR lens quality versus the super modern high-end mirrorless quality lenses. So if you're looking to do super high detailed landscapes or studio work, this lens probably won't be sharp enough for what you're trying to get. However, if you would prefer to go around doing street photos or capturing moments here and there in your daily life, it's plenty sharp to give you high quality images that are probably just as sharp, if not sharper, than what your phone could capture. Also, this lens has quite mediocre build quality. It's not that it feels super cheap, but it doesn't feel nearly as sturdy as more modern lenses. It definitely has a little bit of a jiggle to the internal elements, and the aperture ring is a little bit loose and doesn't feel quite as clicky as some nicer, more modern lenses. And this lens is not weather sealed like a lot of Fujifilm's more modern lenses. And this is especially amplified by the fact that the front element moves when focusing, which means that it allows access for water to get into the lens more easily. So if you do end up getting caught in a rainstorm, you just gotta be careful because this lens does not have that peace of mind that more modern Fujifilm WR lenses have. But probably the biggest issue with this lens, and the thing that it gets hated on the most for, is its focusing motor. There are a couple issues with this camera's focusing. The first one is that it's noisy. This camera makes a lot of noise when it's focusing in and out. It makes this buzzy, jittery sound. Now, personally, I find it quiet enough to where you notice it when you're taking photos, but no one around you really notices it. It's pretty under the radar, and I wouldn't say it's something that would be distracting to other people, but it is something that you do notice while you're shooting with this camera. The other issue with this focusing motor is it's not very smooth. More modern lenses can smoothly rack between focus, and this lens tends to jitter a lot and have a lot of jumpy movements when it gathers focus. Now, I haven't found this to be an issue whenever taking photos, but whenever you're taking video, it's definitely a problem because you can just see those jitters in the video, and it really makes this bad artificial looking focus that does not look pleasing in a video clip. One thing that actually surprised me though was that the focus accuracy on this lens has been very good. I've used this on both a Fujifilm X-T2 and a Fujifilm X-T4, and both of those cameras locked in on focus on photos really easily, and I did not have very many photos that were not very sharp. Now, I will say that most of my experience using this lens has been street photos or simple portraits and have not required fast-moving autofocus. So I'm sure if you're to be tracking a quick-moving subject, that focus motor would really struggle. However, if you're just capturing still subjects that don't need really fast autofocus, I find that it has a really good hit rate and almost all my photos are in focus. So yes, this lens has a lot of very serious issues. However, I love it so much because of how versatile it is as a street photography lens. The vast majority of street photo lenses that you see are at the 35mm equivalent focal length. And I'm a big fan of 35mm. I shoot a lot on my full frame camera at 35mm, but I find that when I'm doing street photos, or if I want to capture the photo of one of my friends who's, across the table from me at a restaurant, 35mm is just a little bit tighter than I'd ideally like. I like to capture a little bit more of the surrounding area, and that 18mm lens, which is like a 28mm roughly equivalent on full frame, is just wide enough to where you can feel like you're really capturing the whole environment, but isn't so wide that you feel like you're just ultra wide and can't narrow in on the details that you want to get. So I love this focal length, and Fujifilm has only made a couple lenses in this equivalent focal length, and the other 18mm lens they make is far more expensive. The other thing that I love about this lens is the f2 aperture. Most small portable lenses you see for the Fujifilm system are not at an f2 aperture. They're usually at about an f2.8. And that means that you get just a little bit more background blur and low light performance out of this lens than you would from, say, the 27mm f2.8. Now that lens is smaller, but I would sacrifice a little bit of a larger lens to get that lower aperture, because I love that whenever you get up close to a subject, it can blur out the background just a little bit and give it that little bit of nice separation, something that you wouldn't get as well using a smartphone as you would using a camera like this. Also, this lens can actually focus surprisingly close. I mean, it's not a macro lens by any means, but if you get pretty close in on a subject, you can really capture some serious details on this lens, and it's one of the closer focusing lenses that I have. And that's a bonus if you just want to capture those little details at a restaurant or in a store or something that's small that you want to get close up on. It can get pretty close, and that's a nice advantage of using a lens like this. And the final reason that I love this lens is I feel like it's just the perfect size. Now this lens is not quite what you would consider a pancake lens. It's just a little bit bigger than what would be a really flat pancake style lens, but it's still short enough to where it doesn't bulge out on your camera. However, what I think it has a clear advantage of over a pancake lens is that it's just big enough to where you can hold it underneath. Let me show you. Here is the 18mm lens on my Fujifilm X-T4. If I had had a pancake lens, I wouldn't really be able to grab the lens with my left hand while I'm taking photos, but this lens is just long enough to where I can rest my left hand underneath the lens. If it was any shorter, I probably wouldn't be able to do that. So this means that I can hold it more comfortably than what I would be able to do with a pancake lens. However, it still is small enough to where it is technically still pocketable. Now, this lens on my decent-sized Fujifilm X-T4, by pocketable, I don't mean that you can just carry it around casually in your pocket. What I mean is that if in a pinch, if you need to free up your hands, it will fit in pants with good-sized pockets. Now, you might get weird looks having this big chunky thing sticking out of your pocket, but it is good to know that in an emergency, if you need to throw it in your pocket, you can do that, and I have done that on multiple occasions if I want to be more discreet and hide it away for a minute, or if I just need to grab something with my hands and I need to put the camera away in an easy way. Also, if you were wearing something like a sweatshirt that had a big front pocket, you could definitely fit this camera in there, and it's just that right size to where it doesn't feel so small that you can't hold it, but it is just small enough to where it's pretty portable. You could easily fit this in a backpack, in a fanny pack, or like I said, in an emergency, you can fit it in your pocket. I have loved using this lens for street photography. What I do is I put on this is a 52mm 1/4 strength diffusion filter. What that does is that just diffuses the light a little bit and gives it this little bit of haze and bloom on the highlights, which I think give it that really filmic look. And whenever you're doing photos that look really filmic, I find that the slight lack of sharpness, maybe some of the chromatic aberration that appears in this lens, actually just gives it a little bit more character in street photos. Like I took photos in this kind of old restaurant that I found in Colorado, and the pictures just kind of have this old vintage feel that I think fit the look of this lens really well. So if you're not going for the most professional looking, perfect lens, then this can give you that kind of old-fashioned style. And like I said, I think it's the perfect focal length for walking around everywhere, capturing the moment, capturing pictures of your friends or family, and I would highly recommend getting this lens. I will say probably the last downside about this lens is its price. So even though this lens has not been extremely well reviewed, I think there are people out there like me who see its value, who see its unique focal length and unique features, and see the value in having a lens like that. And because of that, this lens still sells for usually around $300 used. And if you look at that compared to other old Fujifilm lenses, it's actually not that cheap. You can get a lot of lenses actually for quite a bit cheaper than this. So you would think an old lens like this that doesn't have the best performance would be really cheap, and this one isn't quite really cheap. However, I think if you love this 28mm equivalent focal length and you want something that's small, portable, and comfortable to carry around with you for street photos, for families and friends, this is just honestly a great option, and I've loved mine, and I have never regretted buying this, even at that slightly higher price point. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more content going forward, please hit that subscribe button for me, and I'll see you guys next time.